Ray Blakney, welcome to the Yes Effect Show, buddy. I'm so grateful for you that you're here because today we are going to talk about something that is near and dear to my heart. So, welcome.
Shelly, thanks for having me here. I look forward to it.
Um, you have an incredible software that is released now called Podcast Talk. We're going to get into all of that, but can you start with who you are, what you do, who you serve, and how did you become this guy who just developed this software that is literally going to help millions of people get their message out into the world?
I'll start backwards. The answer to the last question is kind of by accident, and then I'll go into my story. Right. So,
Dynamite.
quick, quick little background about me is let's see. I was born in the Philippines. My dad's from the United States. I grew up in Turkey, and I've been living in Mexico for the last 14 years. So that's a basic background of who I am. By training, I'm a computer engineer. So I've worked at Silicon Valley, Fortune 500 companies in the United States, U.S. government for a bit. And then I decided I did not want to work in a cube and for the corporations anymore. So I quit my job and I joined the US Peace Corps and I volunteered as a Peace Corps volunteer. And that's how I ended up in Mexico. So as you could see, none of that is actually saying, woo, I wanted to be an entrepreneur and launch businesses. It was this kind of path of bouncing around a little bit.
But sometimes when you know what you don't want, that's the breadcrumb to what you
That
really
is
want,
it.
right?
Exactly. And that's kind of was the revelation to it. Is I think a lot of people they have the challenge of, and this is the challenge I have, we have the life we're expected to live,
Mm.
right? So I come from a family of academics, everybody has masters, PhDs, all the rest. And I remember this one incident in high school where they brought in some people to talk about, drug addiction, right? So they break us up into small rooms. Everybody goes through this in high school. And I went to a private school over there in New England. And one of the questions I remember we broke into the small room, we were all sitting on the floor in a circle, and the guy asked, how many of you are planning to go to college? Everybody in my room kind of looked around confused and like, okay, yeah. And everybody raises their hand. I'm like, yeah, we're going to college. It wasn't until about 10 years later that kind of I was thinking back on that incident and it occurred to me these people probably go to schools all across the United States. And not all these schools are private schools in New England where everybody's kind of expected to go on to college. I never thought I would not go on to college. I thought that's just what you did after high school, right? It's like, are you going to go to second grade after you go to first grade? Well, yeah, I mean, that's what you do. That's what it was to me. Um, and that means that was the path I was on for life. What do you do after college? You get a good job at a company that pays you and you get a pension and you stay there for 30 years and you get your golden watch or whatever they give you now.
And at the end, maybe you can live your life if you have any life left in you.
That's exactly it. And that was the path that I actually was on, right? That was what I was there. I probably would have been fine. Um, but there was a commercial on TV. I was about 25, 26 at the time for the US Navy. And my respects to those who are in the armed services. But if somebody starts shooting at me, I'm running away as fast as physically possible. So, like, joining the US Navy wasn't really what I considered doing. But the commercial said, if they were to write a book about your life, would anybody want to read it?
Oh, I
And I
just
remember
got goosebumps.
sitting there. Yeah, I remember sitting there looking at it. And I'm like, I wouldn't read my own book at the path I'm on right now. I'll be in a cube for the next 30 years, probably writing code, probably making a good salary, living in a house. But it would just be a boring life where, like, every day would be a cookie cutter copy of the day before.
Yeah, the soul sucking job that reminds you of all the things that you didn't realize.
That's exactly it. So there was an incident too, like right after that commercial came out. I remember I went to a Halloween party. I was in Cleveland, Ohio at the time, and I went to a Halloween party at this bar called the Blind Pig. And I was standing on stage. I wasn't performing, but it was just so crowded down there, and there was nobody performing. So a bunch of people were standing on the stage, looking out over the crowd. All of us kind of dressed in Halloween, our different Halloween outfits. And I knew a lot of the people in the bar at the time. And I remember some of them were like 10, 15 years older than I was. I was 25. And I remember thinking, in a drunken haze, which is the best time to get your deep thinking on, right? Was that I bet you these people have been in the same bar with doing the same thing for the last 10 or 15 years. I don't want to be here in 15 years doing exactly this anymore. That's what quit my job. That's what caused me to quit my job, to look for something different. I wanted to travel, so I joined the Peace Corps. They pay for you to travel for the most part. They only pay you $150 a month, so it's not, you're not doing it for the money, but they at least could help me travel. And it broke me out of that path. And there is where I met my wife and we launched our first business together. And ever since, it's been 15, 16 years now. And I've been an entrepreneur ever since. And my nightmare is going back to working for somebody else, right? I would wake up in cold sweat at night. If I wake up, I was like, I had a job. That was my nightmare. So I love what I do right now. And I've launched multiple businesses. Luckily, I was doing a little, I was talking to somebody else the other day and I was doing a little thing and they're like, so what was your biggest business failure? And I remember thinking, I'm like, I've never actually had a business that is quote unquote failed in the traditional sense as far as losing money. Most of the businesses don't make enough to make it worth my time, but like, you know, throwing $10,000 at a business and losing it never, ever happened.
Right.
Because I bootstrap them and I do kind of, you know, you put in $100, $200, and it's pretty easy to test a business at that level to see if anybody will buy it first without going down the $10,000 range, especially online. So that's what I do today.
So I want to circle back on what you said about you glossed over it because it was a blip in your story, but I know for everybody's listening, it's a sticking point for their ability to utilize what you do now. So you talked about, quitting your job and then you met your wife and started a business. At some point, there is that moment when you have the thought and you're like, "Ooh, scary," right? Because with all of that, like shackles and chains and golden handcuffs, also comes a certain amount of security and acceptance and fitting in and towing the line and stuff, right? And so when you're standing on the precipice of doing something new that is not guaranteed, it's not like every 2 weeks I'm gonna get my paycheck. You know what I mean? Like, so many of the people that are listening right now are coaches, authors, speakers, entrepreneurs who have a gift that they want to share with the world and should and are going to, and it's going to be amazing. But there is always that moment, just like the one you experienced, where you're looking out into the unknown and you're like, geez, like I can't stay because it's costing me too much to stay, but there is a certain amount of trepidation in going. Can you talk about how you got yourself over that hurdle and what was that first business?
Yeah. So for me, it was considering what the worst case scenario was, you know, when I was going to take that first leap. And it's a leap of faith. You're absolutely right. There is no guarantee at any point, but there's no guarantee at any point when you're in the corporate world these days either. It's not gone are the days of, you know, I'm going to stay in the same job for 40 years and they're going to keep me here. You know, you could be fired tomorrow. You know, there, if that's what, especially if you're working for a big corporation and that the
Right.
bottom line is affected, you could be fired tomorrow. So there's no guarantee where you're at right now. What I tell people generally like this when I'm on shows, when I speak at conferences and they ask similar questions is your worst case scenario most likely is where you are right now. This is your worst case scenario. Because what happens if you try something else and the business doesn't work? I'm not using the word fail because to me, fail means something else entirely. If you
Right.
try something and it doesn't work, you didn't fail, you just tried something and it didn't work. So let's say you try your business and it doesn't quite take you where you're at. Generally speaking, for most of us, that means going back and getting another job. We're recording this in early 2022 and the job market's hot. So like you will get another job in a week, right? We're doing whatever it is you were doing before. You are in your worst case scenario right now. What's
Mhm.
ahead of you is possibly your best case scenario. So that should be kind of the idea you use when you kind of take whatever that leap is into being a coach, into writing your first book, into launching your own business, is thinking about, look, I'm already know where I am right now. Who knows where I could be in the future? And don't be afraid to dream big. Um, this is something that's all in our mindset. And Shelly, you and I were talking about earlier. I had the privilege of meeting some very, very high level entrepreneurs a few months back, um, including Richard Branson and people like that. And I remember when I was speaking with them, two things struck me. So they were talking about, you know, ending wars and climate change and all that kind of stuff.
The
Now,
usual.
the usual. I mean, what else do you talk about over coffee, right? The interesting thing was I understood everything they were saying. So it wasn't like, wow, these people, you know, it's not Einstein where they were just using mathematical formulas that I just totally lost. I knew exactly what they were talking about. So it occurred to me, I'm like, they're not smarter than me, but they think bigger than I ever dreamed to think. Like I would never dare to say, what, you know, I don't wake up in the morning and think, how can I end this war? How can I end hunger in the world? These people do. And
Mhm.
I think that's the difference most of us have to learn. I think at school, they teach us to think small, right? Even as business owners, if you study your MBA, it's like, okay, how can I grow the business 10 or 20% this year, right? That sounds pretty good. Why aren't we thinking about why we can grow the business 10 times this year, 20x this year? We don't even dare to dream like that big, right? We're just like, okay, I can,
Well, you're
what if I
right
can make
because
$4,000 a month?
yeah, because
Yeah.
industrialized thinking and jobs and the traditional
Yes.
trajectory is incrementally increase, but it doesn't account for innovation. It doesn't account for passion. It doesn't account for energy. It doesn't account for serendipity. It doesn't account for drive or vision or anything like that. But my buddy James Wedmore says, you either get the thing you wanted or the lesson you needed. And
Absolutely.
and
And
you
that
and
actually
also
ties into it.
you end up with a new starting point. So worst case scenario, if the thing you tried didn't work out exactly as you did, you've learned something, you have probably new connections, new contacts, new experience, new data point, new starting point, and often it's the push off for the next big thing. So what was that first business that you started with your wife?
Sure. So the first business I started with my wife, oddly enough, was not an online business, even though I'm a computer engineer by training. So my wife was my Spanish teacher when we came to Mexico. So I didn't speak any Spanish. She was one of the people hired by the Peace Corps to teach us how to speak Spanish. So the logical thing for us to do was start a Spanish school, right? A brick and mortar school. We rented an old historic home in downtown in a city called Querétaro in Mexico. And the only money we had in our bank account was about $2,000 that the Peace Corps gives you to buy your plane ticket back to the United States, which I never bought. So I just took that money, had no other money, and we kind of launched it. We would actually sleep on the floor of the school. We couldn't afford to rent a school building and another place for us to live. So we bought an inflatable mattress, which had a hole in it. So we would sleep on the mattress at night and we'd wake up on the floor in the morning because it would slowly eke out as the night went by. We would roll it up, throw it under the office desk. And that would, because we would sleep in the office, and then we would throw it on the office desk so nobody knew we actually slept there that night, because we'd wake up at like 6:30 before anybody arrived, clean up the school, take out the trash, clean the bathroom. I mean, we couldn't even afford people to clean. And then we would launch we would go into classes. So that was the first business that we launched. And luckily, yeah, it took off right away. I mean, we were fully booked the day we opened our doors, and that helped a lot because people put a deposit down, which is what we used to buy the furniture for the school, because we had no money for the furniture. So they'd pay us the deposit. 24 hours before the first students arrived, we were running out to like furniture stores and buying like wooden tables and stuff to throw into our classroom. So that was it. We ran that school for 3 or 4 years. That school became an online school, which is another business that I currently own called livelingua.com. We're one of the top 5 online language schools in the world. And from there, so the first 2 businesses I had, we ended up selling the brick and mortar school. We're successful, financially successful as well. Then I got the shiny object syndrome a lot of entrepreneurs had, and I launched a whole bunch of stuff. As I said, none of them failed in the traditional sense. They all made money, but some of them were making like $50 a month, and I just closed them down. So I'm like, this is not worth my time spending money on. The biggest and most interesting one was I owned a chocolate factory in Southeast Asia for about 5 years. That was kind of a why not, right? I mean, I don't even like chocolate, which was kind
It'd
of
be
the
silly not to, really.
Yeah, just something every entrepreneur growth phase, owning a chocolate factory, I think is just one of those steps you got to go through, right? So I ran that. It was making good money for Southeast Asia. It just wasn't good money for the United States. So I sold my shares of that to my partner. And it goes back to something that you mentioned earlier, right? Where when you try something and it doesn't work, again, I hate using the word fail.
Mm-hmm.
As long as you learn something from that, you've succeeded, because you're a few steps ahead of where you were before. You don't go back to where you were before. You now have this new set of knowledge, new networks, new something, right? That you can now go and try something else. Failure to me is not, falling down. Failure is not getting back up again, right? So if you fall down and get back up again, you have not failed. You just keep moving forward.
Well, the thing I love about you, Ray, is like you exercise what I call like your jump muscle. So you're like, ooh, that feels like a yes to me. Boom, go. So even if it doesn't turn out exactly as you wanted, and for everybody listening, I want you to like really hear that, because oftentimes we will put in our minds the thing we want to do and we want to try, and before we try it, we craft it all out, make sure it's perfect and it's bomb proof and it can't possibly fail. But oftentimes the market will tell you what you want. And oftentimes some of your greatest gifts, the thing that come just so easy to you, you're like, well, that couldn't be a thing. And it's the thing that everybody's asking you about. And you're like, could it actually be that easy? And it comes down to what one of my great mentors, Gail Larson, she's a speaker coach, shaman, just incredible woman. She calls your sacred gift your original medicine. It's a Native American term. And it's that thing, it's that idea, that one thing that if you don't share with the world will be lost for literally all time. And we all have it. And sometimes that sacred gift or that just thing that for you, it's like, oh, yes, but jump and go, see what's needed, pivot. or pivot if you're Ross from Friends, an aside. But it's so often it is that thing that you never saw coming, and then you're like, oh well, I guess I'll give that a try. And so for the people that are listening now, they are either starting something or in that pivot or that metamorphosis where they've had something that comes to them or comes naturally and easily to them, and now they're ready to share it. Enter what you're doing now. How did you segue from where you were to podcast talk?
Great question. And actually we'll tie back into what you were mentioning about that pivot and the self-discovery as well, because it's something that I've come across in podcast talk. So that was the journey. I've run multiple businesses over the last, I've been doing, I'm dating myself, like 15 years, right? I've been kind of on this journey. And I haven't reached the destination. I never will, right? That's kind of another thing about entrepreneurship. It is this journey of self-discovery every single day as you're doing it. So what happened to us is we had sold the brick and mortar school. I had livelingua.com. I still have it, the online language school. It had gotten to the point where my team was running it more or less day to day. And I was looking for something new. And then COVID happened. And I feel embarrassed to say it, but when you have an online education is one of the fields that actually benefited a lot as far as from COVID, because everybody was stuck at home. They wanted to learn a new skill, and languages were pretty high on most people's list. Look, I'm stuck at home. I should learn Mandarin. I should learn Chinese. I should learn Spanish, whatever's out there. So literally in March 2020, like our signups went up 40%, like overnight. As soon as the lockdown happened, we just went up 40%. So the business was doing very well. And we'd been doing primarily most of our marketing through online marketing. So SEO, Facebook ads, Google ads, all the rest of it. And I was thinking, hey, I should try a new way of getting in front of audiences. And I'd been on a few podcasts before, maybe 10, 15 people I knew, people who had seen me speak at conferences invited me, but nothing active that I had done to try to get on podcasts. So I decided, hey, let's get on some more podcasts. So like, what does everybody do when they have a problem? They go to Google and they're like, podcasts to be a guest on, right? I searched for that. It didn't work, right? So you go in there, half the podcasts aren't active anymore. There's no contact information. Or you get the big ones like Tim Ferriss and Joe Rogan. And, I'll put my hand up right now and say, Tim and Joe, if you're listening to the show, I'd love to be on your show. But probably not going to have me on
also Tim and Joe.
Exactly. But chances are probably not. So those are the shows that came up. And I'm like, look, I know there are almost 2 million podcasts in the world, and I could only find like 50 of them in a Google search. This is not practical at all. So I'm like, there's got to be, let me reach out to people who do this professionally, like agencies, see if they can help me get on shows. They wanted to charge me anywhere from like almost $1,000 to $5,000 a month to get me booked on podcast shows. I'm like, look, I'm not going to be paying that much, especially since they can't guarantee high level shows. I mean, this could be a kid in his parents' basement with a microphone that I get on, and I just paid a few $100 to get on the show, right? I'm like, that doesn't make sense. How about a software solution? Nothing. There were these kind of directories, like these old match.com, like websites where podcasters put up their podcast, you put up your thing, and you can kind of see if that works out. But they might have 1,000 podcasts on there, 2,000 podcasts. Again, there are 2 million podcasts in the world. You're only giving me access to 2,000 of them. That's like nothing. So being a software engineer, and as you said, Shelly, like somebody who's like, okay, if it's not there, just do it yourself kind of thing. I'm like, let's see if I can build a better solution to this. So I spent about 6 months myself building a really, really awful MVP, minimum viable product. And I shared it with some friends. I'm like, hey, I now have a database with every podcast in the world and all their contact information. Do you think this would be useful to you? And they were like, yeah. So like, we started doing some searches, and I would give them like lists of emails and stuff like that. And they're like, you should really make this into its own thing. It's a product, you could really help people get out there and share their message with the world. This could be whether you're a business, whether you have a social cause or anything. It's not only on the guest side, but on the podcast side. Unless you're Tim Ferriss, Joe Rogan, or kind of very high level podcasts, you don't get 1,000 pitches every day for shows, right? There's a lot of these great podcasters starting out that are looking for guests. So what we try to do is find the perfect, your ideal guest, and help you find your ideal podcast, get you two together and make some magic happen. So that's kind of what Podcast Talk does. We let you search all the podcasts, and then we actually do the email pitching for you afterwards on the back end. So we will help you send the emails out, the follow-ups, and all you have to do once you set up a campaign in Podcast Talk is hit start and then go away. And then as soon as somebody comes back to you and says, yeah, Shelly, I'd love you on my show, we send you a little message. Somebody just replied, and then you take it from there. Usually a Calendly link, sometimes there's an intake form where they want some more information, but that's all on you. You don't actually have to do anything. And hopefully that'll help a lot of people get their message out. And I'm using it myself. I date myself by using the Hair Club for Men reference, right? If anybody who's old enough to remember those commercials, it's, I'm not only, I'm not only the CEO, I'm also a client. And
I like the customer. I like the company so much I bought it or something like that.
Exactly. Use the product. I do that too. I have been, in the last year, I've been on close to 200 podcasts, and I'm trying to get on 1,000 podcasts to show people what can be done. And this will tie back into what you were talking about kind of finding your one superpower, right? Like what makes you you.
Yeah.
Going on podcasts. So there are the expected effects of going on podcasts, right? There's the marketing. You get access to a new audience. There's search engine optimization. If they have a website, you get a backlink. It's free social media, because most podcasters will create social media and post on social media and all that. People kind of know that side of podcasting. What they don't realize is it is an amazing, if you're a podcast guest, it's an amazing journey of self-discovery. Because, for example, Shelly, you've probably been asked this tons of times because you've interviewed, but most people, including myself when I started, was not the case. They say, tell me about yourself. I remember the first time somebody asked me that, my answer was all over the place. I was like, well, I was kind of born here. I kind of do this. Because it's not a question we get that regularly. When we meet somebody new, they might say it, but usually ask, what do you do? And that's kind of the end of the conversation. But somebody asking for your whole backstory is not that usual.
It's a different set of skills to be able to have a story or be able to tell a story. That's actually what I teach people. So I work in conjunction with the people who need what you have, right? So I help people land, lead, and leverage a magnetic interview. But most of that is surrounding story. And how do you move an audience? How do you build the tension and release the tension? And most importantly, how do you have the audience see themselves in your story? The second they see themselves in your story, you got them and you can take them anywhere. And to be honest, that's the only way you can ever make a transformation for somebody else anyway.
Exactly, because they have to be able to relate to you. And, I wish I'd met you a year ago before I started, because I learned it kind of all of this the hard way. Because when people ask you to tell a story or your story, because sometimes they want anecdotes out of your life, and you need to be able to tell those in kind of a way that resonate, passes a message on as well. There's two sides to it. It's the side that you were talking about, which means you need to be prepared. You need to know what the stories are. You need to kind of craft them in a way that makes sense. And then number two, you need to practice that story, because it's all good going through all of your worksheets and your workshop and all the rest of it, but if you don't go out in the world and actually use everything that you learn with Shelly, it's useless, right? It's like, what do they say? Knowledge isn't power, knowledge is potential power. And that's it. So going through your course gives them the knowledge, but then you have to go out there and tell your story, not once, not twice, but 50 times, 100 times. And I guarantee to you, two things are going to happen by the time you've told your story 100 times. One, you'll know it, it'll be second nature for you to tell that story and tell it perfectly, right? Take up the emotion in the right time and kind of bring in the drama and the all of that in the right time. The second thing, though, is you will believe it, because I see a lot of people have that where their story, and I know this from personal experience. There's our story in our life, but then there's the way we see our story in our life, and that's not always in the same place, right? The way other people see you is not the way you see yourself. But the more you tell it, the more you see people's reaction when you're talking to them. Their faces light up when you want their face to light up. They look, maybe thoughtful in the times that you want them to be thoughtful. We're doing this on audio format, but almost all podcasts I do now has a video component to it where you can actually see at least the host. Slowly, those two different points, and for those of you who are not watching, who've not seen this on a video, my hands are coming closer together, start to kind of coalesce a little bit better. So suddenly the story you're telling is also the story you believe. And when that happens, that's kind of an explosive point in your life, I believe, right? Because suddenly you are who people think you are. And until that point, you're holding yourself back, because most people are amazing, but most people don't think they're amazing. And until you think you are, you're not going to be able to get to that next level.
Right. Yeah. And there is, I don't want to call it a trick, but there is a way to tell your story that your audience sees themselves in your story. But the truth is this, you having a gift or a way that can help people, whether it's a message or a mission or a product that that is going to offering, it's unhelpful if nobody knows about it and that solution exists in a vacuum. And
Hmm.
so if people don't have the ability to find you, you don't have the ability to share that gift. I know there was a palliative care nurse wrote a book on the regrets of the dying, and one of the biggest regrets is those people that just wished they had lived their true life, that had done the things they wanted to do, that had taken that risk, that like yourself had jumped into the unknown without, complete assurance that it was going to look like this. The truth is, though, the magic only exists on the other side of that.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, how much better would the world be if everybody was able to share their story, share their gift with the world, and not be held back by whatever constraints, real or perceived, that everybody has, right? But some of us have real constraints, but we can overcome those. And some of us only have perceived constraints that we don't even know are there until kind of we try sharing our story, and then we have to kind of have to believe it. So going back to podcast talk, that's exactly it. We want people to share the story. So we built it for, obviously, if you want to go in there and you have a book and all the rest of it, you can go in there. We have a fee. It's a bootstrap business. That's all I know how to do. So, we're talking like at the time of the recording, about $39 to $69 is our price point. But I want to mention that if your story is to help the world, if you work for an NGO, if you work for a social cause, just email us. We give you a free for life account, absolutely for free, because we want you to get your message out there. If you're helping the homeless, if you're helping feed people, we will absolutely not charge you. We want your short story to get out there. We want either your story, your organization's story to get out there. So we offer 100% free, no upsells, nothing like that. We give you the highest account we have. Get your story out there, make the world a better place.
That's rock solid, Ray. I'm going to put the link to the software in the show notes. But if people are looking for you personally, if they're looking to reach out to you online, where's the best place they can find you?
Yeah, so I have my own personal page, which I don't update all the time, but rayblakney.com. So RayBlakney.com. So you can kind of go up there and kind of keep up with the newest shows I've been on, maybe some conferences I'm going to go and speak at. That's generally what I put on that page. On social media, I am on Facebook. So you can look for rayblakney.com on Facebook. You'll see a picture of me and somebody sword fighting, which is what I do in my free time. So you'll see that there as well, because why not, right?
Why not?
And Twitter, you can follow me at RayBlakney.com, RayBlakney.com. I just recently started becoming more active on Twitter, so hopefully that'll continue.
Amazing. So we'll pop the link into the show notes. That's at theyesfactshow.com. And Ray Blakney, I love your face. Thank you so much, first of all, for creating this. It's incredible. And thanks for also doing the solid for the people who are out there who are, bootstrapping and trying to make the world a better place. So super appreciate you, buddy.
I've been there, so happy to help. Thanks, Shelley.